It was my first night working security at the old Willow Creek Mall. The place had been shut down for years after a series of unsolved murders, but someone had to watch over it until it was demolished. The night started uneventfully. I patrolled the empty halls, my flashlight flickering over dusty mannequins and boarded-up store windows. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the air vents. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the food court. Probably rats, I muttered, but my grip tightened on the flashlight as I headed toward the noise. The food court was empty, chairs stacked on tables, the counters coated in grime. But the tapping continued, steady and deliberate. It was coming from the janitor's closet. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. When I opened it, the closet was empty except for a small TV sitting on the floor, its screen crackling with static. As I stepped closer, the static shifted, forming an image, a live feed of me standing in the food court. I whipped around, my heart pounding, but there was no one there. When I turned back to the screen, a figure appeared behind me in the footage. A man, face obscured by shadows, holding something in his hand. "Hello?" I called out, spinning around again. The food court was still empty. I turned back to the screen just in time to see the man in the footage raise a knife. Before I could react, the power went out, plunging the mall into darkness. Panic set in as I fumbled for my flashlight. When it flickered back on, I saw him standing at the end of the hall, the knife glinting in the beam of light. "Who are you?" I shouted, backing away. He didn't answer, just started walking toward me. I ran, my footsteps echoing as I darted through the maze of empty stores. I could hear his slow, deliberate footsteps behind me, never speeding up, but always getting closer. I burst into the security office and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. My chest heaved as I scanned the room, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. The monitors were on, showing live feeds of the mall. In every camera, he was there, at the food court, in the hallways, outside the office door. Then the screens went dark, one by one, until only one remained. It showed me in the security office, and him standing right behind me. The last thing I felt was a cold hand on my shoulder.
It was supposed to be an easy night. I was babysitting for the Thompsons, a sweet couple with a quiet toddler named Emma. Once Emma was asleep, I settled on the couch and turned on a movie. The house was eerily silent except for the faint hum of the baby monitor on the coffee table. Halfway through the movie, the monitor crackled. I glanced at it, expecting to hear Emma stirring. Instead, I heard a man's voice. "She's such a cute little girl." I froze, staring at the screen. Emma was still in her crib, sleeping soundly, but the voice came through again, calm and steady. "I think I'll take her." Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone and ran to Emma's room. The door was ajar, but she was there, safe and sleeping. I locked the door and called the police, whispering about the voice on the monitor. They told me to stay put until officers arrived. That's when I heard it again. "Why did you lock the door, Emily?" My blood ran cold. My name wasn't Emily. The voice on the monitor chuckled. "You shouldn't have looked." Suddenly, a loud bang came from downstairs. I bolted to the window, ready to scream for help, but flashing red and blue lights appeared in the driveway. The police burst through the front door moments later. I ran to them, babbling about the voice on the monitor. They searched the house and found no one. But then, one of the officers picked up the monitor, his face turning pale. "Where's the other camera?" he asked. "What do you mean?" I stammered. He held up the monitor, pointing at the feed. It wasn't showing Emma's room anymore. It was showing the living room. And there, sitting on the couch where I had been moments ago, was a man staring straight into the camera. When I moved into my new apartment, I was relieved to have only one neighbor, an older man named Mr. Gray. He lived in the unit next to mine and rarely came outside. People in the building whispered that he had lost his wife years ago and kept to himself. At first, I barely noticed him. The The occasional muffled cough through the thin walls or the faint sound of his TV late at night were the only signs he was even there. But then, strange things started happening. One evening, I found a sticky note on my door. It read, "Don't trust him." I knocked on Mr. Gray's door to ask if he'd seen anyone near my apartment, but he didn't answer. From inside, I heard the faint sound of shuffling feet and a lock turning. The next morning, I woke to find another note. This time it was slid under my door. It read, "He's watching you." Paranoia crept in. I started double-checking my locks, peeking through the peephole before going outside. I even considered moving out. Then one night I heard screaming. It came from Mr. Gray's apartment. I ran to his door and banged on it, shouting his name, but there was no answer. The screams turned to sobs, then silence. I called the police, explaining what I had heard. When they arrived, they broke down the door. Mr. Gray's apartment was empty. Dusty furniture, unopened mail, and a thick layer of grime suggested no one had lived there for years. But in the living room they found something chilling. Dozens of sticky notes plastered the walls, all written in the same shaky handwriting. "Don't trust him. He's watching you. He knows." One officer looked at me, his face pale. "Whoever wrote these, they weren't warning you about Mr. Gray." That's when I noticed a new note taped to the inside of my apartment door. It read, "He's already inside."
I had just moved into the house, an old two-story that looked straight out of a horror movie. The neighbors said it had been empty for years, but I didn't mind. It was cheap, and after a messy breakup, I needed a place to start over. The first night was peaceful, but on the second night, I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from the attic. I thought it was just the house settling, but it was too rhythmic to be that. It almost sounded like someone, or something, was dragging itself across the floor. I tried to ignore it. After all, it was an old house, right? But it happened every night, the scratching followed by muffled voices. I decided I'd had enough and went up to the attic the next evening, armed with a flashlight. The stairs creaked under my weight as I made my way up. When I reached the top, the air grew cold. The attic was dimly lit by the pale moonlight streaming through a small window. I scanned the space, seeing nothing but boxes, old furniture, and cobwebs. The scratching started again. I spun around, heart hammering, but saw no one. Then, the voices. "Help us. Please." The whispers came from the far corner of the attic. Trembling, I approached cautiously, the flashlight shaking in my hand. As I reached the corner, my foot kicked something, a small wooden box. I bent down to pick it up. It was old, covered in dust with intricate carvings. I opened it, and inside was a piece of yellowed paper, covered in what appeared to be hastily scrawled handwriting. I squinted to read it, my flashlight flickering. "The voices will never stop until you set us free." Suddenly, the room went silent, too silent. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the scratching and whispering had stopped, because they were standing behind me. I turned slowly, but before I could even react, the flashlight flickered out. The only thing I could hear was a single, soft whisper in my ear. "You shouldn't have opened the box." The next morning, when the neighbors found me, I was sitting in the attic, eyes wide open, frozen. But I wasn't alone.